Welcome, everyone, to the Contact Center Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we have a very interesting conversation with Mark McKercher. Now, Mark, you are the VP of Global Customer Support at Sovos, and I want you to explain a little bit more about that in just a minute. But you've got a big customer support and operations experience set behind you, and you're using that today to be one of the leading voices throughout the entire company about how you adopt AI, what the AI strategy is. So we're going to get into that because our title is Why Your AI is Failing Before It Starts. It's interesting, over 80% of AI deployments actually do fail, right? So this isn't that, we can laugh a little bit about it, but you've got to really be able to do this right, especially in a customer support and contact center environment, right? But what I'd love to do before we get started is just turn it over to you to learn a little bit more about your background. And we just found out, we both shared that we have sons that are on the autism spectrum. And
Yes,
I could have talked for probably 3 or 4 hours over a beer about that. And the wonderful
absolutely.
things that come with that, as well as the challenges. But if you wouldn't mind, just maybe expanding a little bit more on your background.
Yeah, sure. Great to be here with you, Steve. I appreciate the invitation. So I've been in and around customer experience contact centers for about 25 years now. I've worked for some of the bigger tech companies out there, including Amazon, Google, and most recently at Roku, helping build out the customer experience for their recurring revenue products like payments and commerce. And currently leading the AI implementation and the support customer experience function at Sovos. We are a global tax compliance provider. We have over 100,000 customers, including half of the Fortune 500. And we've been on a really amazing transformation journey for the last year and a half almost, where we've gone from being, I think, very much based on tribal knowledge and it's all in people's heads to bringing in a third party BPO to help us build some process optimization. And then more recently, purchasing a AI technology and literally just this week launching its first aspects, which are knowledge generation and Copilot. So really excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's tap into all that experience. But I want to start in a non-AI conversation,
hmm
because to take a customer support organization into the world of AI and what it can do and the kind of value that it can provide back to the organization is tremendous. But I think we need to start with kind of where in general are we seen as an organization? In a lot of places, we're kind of seen as a support center. We're seen as a cost center to be
Right.
contained. If the C-suite is looking as one of the biggest cost, sources on the spreadsheet, then the KPIs that tend to come down and how we're judged are on containment, not expansion. And what you're talking about is a quite dramatic expansion of the capabilities of the support department. So I'd love to have you start talking about how we break free from these kind of preconceived notions to get started.
Yeah, sure. Great point. I think to your point, historically, most of my career, support has been thought of absolutely as a cost center, a cost of doing business, right? You've got to be able to provide support of any product, regardless if it's consumer or B2B. I think with the launch or the public launch of ChatGPT, almost 3 years ago, right, that changed the whole equation. I never forget a few months after it went live when I was at Roku, our CEO, the first thing he said was, wow, the first thing we can do here is really automate and simplify support, which was really exciting, but very scary at the same time when you, as a support leader, know the historic kind of situation of candidly lacking investment in the foundational layer of the data that's required to make AI work. So today, what I'm starting to find is we as support across the ecosystem or across the marketplace, I think, have a different level of engagement seat at the table because we are, as I mentioned earlier, in a place where we're able to start leading the business and how we actually use this technology. And most C-suites and boards are incredibly obsessed right now with how do you harness this technology to create efficiencies. And ideally, as a CX leader, right, I want to think about how do we change the game with how customers engage with a brand, right? And how do we turn support from just a cost center into a revenue center? How do we create and drive revenue? One of the things we're thinking about right now that we'll be working on later this year and likely early next year is how do we change our premium support models with this AI to be able to leverage and get more out of the people that we already have by handling those very transactional, simple password and access type questions with technology, and then having people providing higher levels of support. The seat at the table is really expanding now, and that's exciting.
We all have, no matter what position we're at inside of the organization, we have this many things that are on the proactive side of the list that we don't quite always get to.
Right.
We can do what you're talking about and take a lot of the traditional kind of level one layer of support and handle that automatically so that we can take the human support and really focus that on the kinds of issues that are coming up that would do nothing but increase our NPS scores, our CSAT scores, our loyalty scores. And then in the name of the CEO, our NRR, right? Net recurring revenue and the things that
Right.
we can do to impact the business. And that's just the starting point. So I think that's kind of the foundation to the conversation here and how important the adoption of AI is. But you wouldn't mind kind of say, what's the underlying problem with AI that has it really failing before it even gets started? And I think you talked about funding, right?
Sure.
As kind of that layer there. If you could expand on that a bit more.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is funding, and it is knowing that there's short-term investment to get the return you're looking for, right? The piece I was sort of alluding to earlier is what we've found in my current role is we have a lot of documentation about our products and technologies that we offer to our customers, but we don't have the type of documentation that's generally needed to create simplified automation. So we've invested in bringing in some resources to help us with a foundational knowledge layer. So that was a big win to get the investment to do that. We are in a place right now where we're using AI technology to quickly automate and simplify how we handle incident management, right? That also takes fewer people to do. For instance, it used to take 20 people to do something maybe 5 people can do now. But the big call out here is what I've seen in the last couple of years, and even myself, I'll take kind of some ownership. You just can't buy something and flip a switch. It's not like turning on a light. There's significant investment in the foundation of making it work. And I think that's just a part of the story that needs to be constantly brought back to the surface. Because as I did pilots and did planning to look at different tooling that is out there, a lot that I'm hearing in the marketplace now is just, oh, you can just buy our technology and it'll just solve all your problems. And that's never been really true. And it's not true now either.
If you could give us maybe, without revealing anything proprietary, but story of how it isn't just plug and play, right? The technology providers do phenomenal work, but the fact that it's plug and play, it just isn't realistic, right? So maybe give us a couple of other ideas or a story, how you have to invest, like that data layer, right? So important. Garbage in, garbage out, right? With AI.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else should we be thinking about in preparing ourselves so we aren't failing right at the beginning?
I think setting the expectation for what you're going to try and accomplish and what your key metrics are. What are you trying to measure? Those are a couple ones that are top of mind for me. As I said, the foundational layer is likely, in most cases, some form of a knowledge base, how you get there and how quickly you can get there. And frankly, how do you leverage some of the AI technology to help you with that? That's one of the first things that we're using the AI tech that we bought for. But beyond that, I think you've got to build the foundational metrics, as I said, and you've got to provide the other thing that we found to be very beneficial is provide consistent updates as to what's happening. So speaking to the thing you said at the top, there was a recent study that came out by McKinsey that indicated 95% of a lot of these AI pilots are failing. I think that the reason for that is these very unrealistic outcomes are being set up front without really understanding all the work that needs to go on to make it a reality. So I really have found a lot of benefit in doing executive level updates at a minimum of once a month and being really open and candid about where we tried something and where we failed, right? I think that's what I enjoy the most about where I am right now. A lot of the bigger companies I've been a part of, you would work really hard never to show what you failed. But I think in the world of AI right now, being very open about where you fail, what you learned, and what you're going to do differently is a really powerful thing to have. So I think that's a really key thing for leaders to be thinking about.
Setting expectations and constantly managing those expectations, especially every initiative today has a lot of visibility. right?
Right.
There's a lot of expectation of what's going to happen. Is one level of that expectation not only how it's going to help customer support in the
Hmm.
ways we talked about, before from NPS to NPR or NRR, but how it's going to help the rest of the company? Because what you're learning isn't just siloed into better customer support, it's better product development, it's
Hmm.
better sales, it's better marketing. You're learning across the board. Was that a part of the sell in on? Because I'm thinking about underfunded as one of the big problems. But to fund
Right.
the thing, you got to be an internal salesperson, right? You've got to advocate for this and pay.
Sure.
Sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great point. I would say, thankfully, right now, with the amount of, I would almost call it hysteria around AI and the possibility, getting the funding is not near as hard as it was, say, 10 or 15 years ago to do a chatbot, right? Because that was a very different sort of, we weren't in the world that we're in right now where everything is AI first. So I think that's one point. But yeah, absolutely. One of the key criteria that we put together was like, how good can this AI technology be with helping us with overall sentiment so that we can take true signals that are coming through from customers, aggregate them, and provide them to product teams to say, hey, you don't actually have to. We'll still do NPS within product to get points in time, customers' journey within the product and what their experience is with it. I think there's still a lot of value in that. But what we'll be able to do now and what we're going to be doing in the very near future is taking all of our cases and by product organization that the way we're set up, providing sentiment. And that's going to just as much call out where maybe support was a little slow to respond or was not as engaged as we need to be, but it's also going to call out very specifically the areas of the product there where customers are failing. And I think that will not only help product and dev, but it will also help sales as they learn to go to market and understand, hey, this is an area we probably need to pay more attention to. And this is an area customers need more help on when we enable them, when we set them up.
So, you mentioned the McKinsey study. There was another study that said most companies don't have a good voice of the customer program, yet the executives realize and understand this is the source of ideas and innovation and feedback,
Hmm.
but only 15% truly executed on it across their entire organization. And what you're talking about right now is taking that voice of the customer and executing, not only to help in customer support, but the role, and this helps get that seat at the table, not be seen as a cost center only, right? You
Right.
you are significantly helping other departments. And that can't be underscored in terms of probably the expectations up front that setting with an AI implementation that will help get that funding to do the kinds of things foundationally that you need to do to make sure that you're going to have success. I wanted to just transition for a second. Was that a good takeaway, by the way? That was kind of from what you were saying, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. I think so. Yeah.
So here's the other one. You just went through a process and vetted and hired, you said, a third party BPO partner. You
Hmm.
talked about in our previous conversation, cutting through the vendor noise to build a real AI
Hmm.
strategy, because we're probably all getting emails every single day from AI
Right.
companies saying we can change your world, right?
Yeah.
How did you cut through that noise to find a solution and a partner that you felt was the right way to go?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think to your point, the amount, especially in the customer experience space, the amount of companies out there is staggering. And I think I've been talking about with people for a couple of years, the great consolidation, right? When is Salesforce and Amazon and Google, like, when are they going to buy up a bunch of these things and sort of like, the market become a little less murky with all the different players? But to answer the question, we had some help in my current role because we were asked to move incredibly quickly in a matter of weeks, not months or a year, right? So that helped us. So what we did is we took a look at one company that was out there that had been recommended by one of our investors, and then another one that I'd had some experience with. And really what we did is we created 6 criteria, made it really clear to both vendors. We required to run a 2-week proof of concept or a pilot, depending on like how people want to articulate that. And we just put the tool through the paces and, hey, can it do things like connect to our Salesforce instant elegantly and quickly without any dev work? That was one of them, for example. Another one was this knowledge generation piece, because that was a big foundation of what we needed to work on out of the gate. Where can it look at our cases and suggest where we need the most help from a knowledge perspective? And we graded both tools on that. And then there were some things that were a little bit more, gut feel, like how do we feel about the background and the kind of the financial stability of the business? How do we feel about the founders? Are they deeply engaged, or are they all, doing marketing activities, right? Things like that. So those are a couple of the ways that we thought about it, and feel pretty good about it, and we're pretty successful in picking a partner that's right for us.
So you talked there and before about kind of like operations talent, like do certain things like connect our sometimes fragmented data silos, like between Salesforce and this tool. You actually talked about building AI teams from operations talent. And what
Right.
did you mean by that?
Well, the key thing I mean by that is I set up a pillar within the support organization of my current company that is about AI and governance, right? Which probably historically has been called training and quality, or knowledge training and quality, right? But we sort of pivoted the naming convention of it to be focused on what they're really thinking about now, which is AI. But what I'm assuming a lot of other leaders are facing is we didn't get just like this new big pile of money to go hire people that have 15 years of AI experience, which is kind of laughable to think about in general, right? But like you see a lot of postings out there, like must have 15 years of, AI experience, which I find kind of funny. So what we've had to do is we've had to look at our team as it existed and look at the talents and the skills of folks and see where they might like take to this, because we're taking people who are historically support operations delivery people and asking them to change what they're doing, move away from their normal thing of coming in and firefighting and being the hero and solving the problem and then moving on to the next one, and coming in and being more strategic and more thoughtful about, hey, how can I take a technology and build a layer so that a lot of these questions don't even need an engagement from a person, right? How do we just like simplify it and constantly be questioning process, the technology itself, how we have people deployed, right? It's just a very different skill set. It's much more strategic. But the good news is, Steve, in today's marketplace, it's an easy sell because people are inundated by the news of AS. So really, we just said, hey, look, we're all figuring this out as we go.
Yeah.
So, right, like, so you're going to be on the front, like this, there could not be a better resume builder than being on the front line of this and figuring it out as we go. But the last point I would make is there's been a lot of coaching and collaboration and conversation around it's okay not to know what you're doing. Well, a lot of people are just like, but this is freaking me out. I have no idea. What are you even talking about? I'm like, yeah, we don't either. Right. Like, let's do this. Right. So it makes it fun, but also there's a good bit of like support and coaching that's required. You can't just say, hey, so and so, go figure that out. So I have a senior director on my team who's come from his background actually is delivery, but he's got a really deep data management, sort of data architecture experience. So that's been very helpful. And that's one thing I would say is people in these roles generally are more successful if they're interested by data and understanding how data works together.
Such an interesting thing. None of us got into customer support CX thinking we needed to be data geeks.
Well, I remember when I was early in my career, that was a function, right? It was a whole function. And maybe at some bigger companies it still is, but the size of the company I'm at now, that sort of sits within each function and so forth. So yeah, none of us really thought that we would be data geeks. That's for sure.
But it's a requirement. And I
Yeah.
like your thought process on this because we are all kind of figuring it out. And even with the help of an outside vendor, we still know our business, right? More than they know our business and what we
Right.
need to do. So having just the core competencies of somebody that doesn't have 15 years of AI experience, right?
Right.
But
Right.
what are some of the underlying core competencies that build out an appropriate team? And a data background is absolutely one of them. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
You talked about in the beginning, I think right before we even started recording, you're really passionate, right, about taking a lot of the traditional, support tickets and things that come in and automating them.
Mhm.
Obviously doing it in a way where the customers, the clients, they feel like they're being very well handled and taken care of. What's your transforming kind of customer experience from more email focused to more self-service portals? What is your thought on that? And how quickly do you think you're going to get there?
I think it depends on what type of business you're in. I think if you're in a more B2C transactional kind of e-commerce sales types of business, sort of table stakes at this point to have portals and so forth. What I'm finding in the B2B space, it's less normal that stuff exists. It's still very common for customers just to have an email address that they email, or a phone number that they traditionally call. But what we've done through our discovery over the last 6 months or year is realize it's very difficult to enable self-service and automation by having an email address that creates a case. It also is very difficult to know anything about the customer. So what we did a study and found that 5 minutes on average within one market we were spending trying to figure out who someone was when they contacted us. So we are going on this journey where, one, we're trying to convince and create evangelists internally with all the people who are used to customers being able to just email us to say, hey, this is not good for them. This makes it harder for us to support them and makes their experience more difficult, meaning it's a higher effort experience. So it's been this multi-quarter experience where we're working on that internally. And now we're about to go out to the customers and let them know, hey, we've got this new portal, and great news, it actually has frequently asked questions for a lot of the questions you would normally email us about. And what we're going to sign up for is provide a faster response to you and provide an overall quicker experience. So there's going to be some change management, and that's significant change management that's required, but also we're predicting and expecting some thrash and frustration because we're changing the way that it works for our customers. But what we deeply believe and we're going after is building a portal that is really, really solid and has that frequently asked questions. And then if customers get frustrated, giving that off ramp to a human really, really quickly. Those are kind of our guiding principles.
Yep. You know, it's all about building relationships. The entire CX strategy is founded on relationships. And you talked about build relationships before build AI. And I wanted to understand a little bit more about what you meant there.
Yeah, I think one of the things I realized is building the internal bridges where we talked about a little bit earlier in the conversation, where we're not just a break fix shop, but we're actually strategic partners for product, for dev. And so I think building the relationships internally to try and make sure people understand what we're trying to do is a big one. As I mentioned earlier, doing monthly updates. I'm about to do one for September later today or tomorrow, where we share, here are our wins, here are our challenges, here are the things that broke, right? And here's where we're trying to get better. But what's really gotten clear for me this last 6 or 9 months is we can't, just because it's AI related and just because we believe it's going to make the customer experience better in the long term, doesn't mean there's not a lot of internal collaboration required. So that cross-departmental communication, building the right rapport with my peers, all of that's really critical so that we create, as I said earlier, sort of evangelists for what we're doing versus detractors, right? Because if we've got detractors internally, then we're going to really struggle to create the right experience for the customers to embrace the technology. But yeah, I think that's really been a big one for me this year, just building the right relationships cross-functionally. And as we said earlier as well, being viewed as a leader in this space and someone that really, a organization that really wants to figure out how to use this to create better experiences and lower effort, for sure.
One of the main things that I heard out of that was you can't stop being an internal salesperson. You got to
Right.
constantly be working with the other departments and letting them know, just like we do overall with our customers, it's all about how we help you, right?
Right.
We're going to help you solve challenges that you have a difficulty solving on your own, right? And you're doing that with your internal customers.
Right.
Is that a good takeaway?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Then here's what I'd love to do. I'd love to have your takeaway overall. We've talked about so much here, and our poor human brains can only remember about 2 or 3 things at once.
Right.
You were to say for anyone consuming this podcast, the number one thing that you want them to take away from the conversation, what would that be?
Well, I think the number one thing is being deliberate about the technology that you go and select, while also being aware that no technology is going to, just like I said earlier, it's not a light switch. It doesn't matter how much of a good foundational data or knowledge layer you have, there's significant work involved. Be aware of that and be thinking about that as you go into this journey. Like if it's too good to be true, it probably is, right? I think that's probably the main thing, right? Because I heard a lot when in this whole journey over the last year where I was like, wow, if that were true, that would be really amazing. That would make me not have to really invest much or do very much. Well, I've not experienced anything like that yet, right? We actually had to do the footwork. It's actually probably, I think I heard this maybe 6 months or a year ago, and it proved to be really true in our launch of AI technology. It's not near as much about the technology as people probably think. It's a whole lot more about change management and getting people to change their perspectives. That's what it's really all about, which is bizarre because all we're talking about is this new technology that's going to do all these things. But when you actually try and go enable it and do it, it's all about change management.
Words of wisdom. And I got to tell you, the mission behind this podcast is to literally listen to our peers, other executives that are trying to do similar things and learn from their experience and their perspectives and their insights, like you just shared here. And if we do all that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I just wanted to say, I thought you were a pretty darn important part of that rising tide today. So thank you for coming on. I appreciate it.
And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much.